Yo, 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 what is up, Bengals Nation? Dre here from Street Hoops, and today we are talking about a receiver room that might have the single best 1-2 punch in the entire National Football League. And yet, according to a breakdown that just dropped featuring Hall of Fame caliber wideout Steve Smith Sr., that same room might also be sitting on top of a ticking time bomb. I need you to really sit with that for a second, because this is one of the most fascinating conversations I've come across all off-season, and by the time I'm done walking you through it, you're going to understand exactly why the Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver room is simultaneously the most electric and the most fragile unit on this entire roster. Let's start with the obvious, because you already know it, I already know it, and honestly the whole league already knows it. Ja'Marr Chase is the best receiver on planet Earth right now. Full stop. No debate needed on this channel. This is a guy who just became the most recent member of that ultra-exclusive Triple Crown club, leading the league in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in the same season, and when Steve Smith broke this room down, he didn't hesitate for 1 second before crowning Chase the top guy at the position, league-wide. And here's the part that should scare every single defensive coordinator prepping to face Cincinnati this fall. Chase might have the highest floor of any receiver in football, and the highest ceiling. Think about how rare that combination actually is. Most guys are one or the other. You've got high floor possession guys who never blow up for 40, but also never disappear. And then you've got boom or bust ceiling guys who can go off for 200 yards one week and vanish the next. Chase is both, simultaneously, at the same time. That's the definition of a nightmare matchup, and it's exactly why he's the engine of everything this offense wants to accomplish in 2026. But here's where the conversation got real interesting. Because Steve Smith wasn't just sitting there gassing Chase up for the sake of gassing him up, he raised a genuinely thoughtful question about where Chase goes from here. What's the next level for a guy who's already touched the ceiling of individual receiver production? And Smith's answer floored me a little bit, because it wasn't about more stats, more touchdowns, more highlight catches. It was about comfort, about Chase understanding that he doesn't have to be the answer to every single problem this offense faces on every single snap. And that right there is where this breakdown pivots from great receiver talk into something much deeper about the entire structure of this Bengals offense. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that Smith laid out, and I want you to really absorb this. Cincinnati has built their entire offensive identity around throwing the football all over the yard, constantly, relentlessly. And a huge reason why is because, historically, they haven't had the offensive line to consistently run the ball, and they haven't invested equally on the defensive side to be a team that can win multiple ways. So what happens? You lean into what works. You lean into Joe Burrow's arm, into Chase's route running, into Higgins winning contested catches, and it becomes this incredible, must-watch, fireworks show offense. But it also becomes wildly predictable if you're not careful, and defenses around this league have started to figure that out. And this is where Smith dropped one of the spiciest lines of the entire breakdown. He said flat out that he believes head coach Zach Taylor is on the hot seat heading into this season. Hot seat, hot potato, hot tamale, hot Tabasco, however you want to phrase it, the point landed. And I want to be clear here, Bengals fans, this is Steve Smith's opinion, not some league-confirmed fact. But it's an opinion worth taking seriously given who's saying it and the reasoning behind it. Because part of the criticism isn't really about play calling on Sundays, it's about roster construction. It's about building such an attractive, quarterback-friendly, receiver-friendly system that the front office hasn't matched that same level of investment and detail on defense, or on finding legitimate difference makers behind Chase and Higgins in that receiver room. When your identity becomes we're going to outthrow everybody, you'd better have complete conviction that the other phases of your team can hold up their end too. And that's the tension defining this entire Bengals season before a single snap has even been played. Now let's get into T. Higgins, because Smith did not hold back on the praise here either. Elite, elite, elite. That's literally how he described him, 3 times in a row for emphasis. And honestly, fair. Career high 11 touchdowns last season. A guy who pairs with Chase like peanut butter and jelly, to use Smith's exact phrase. And honestly, I don't think there's a better way to describe that chemistry. Here's the wild part, though. Smith made the case that Higgins is a Robin on this specific roster, but he could absolutely be a Superman, the unquestioned WR1 on a lot of other teams around this league. And the fact that he's still here, still grinding it out as the second option behind Chase instead of chasing a bigger role and a bigger check somewhere else, says something real about the kind of competitor he is and how much he values being part of something special in Cincinnati. So you've got two genuine superstars, two guys who win early in their releases, who create separation at a level most receiver duos in this league simply cannot match. That's not up for debate. But here's where Smith's breakdown takes its sharpest turn, and honestly, this is the part of the video I need you locked in for, because this is the real story of the Bengals receiver room heading into training camp. After Chase and Higgins, there is a legitimate, undeniable drop-off in proven, trusted depth. Think about that for a second. This is a team that carries 6 wide receivers on the active roster every single season. Chase obviously isn't playing special teams. The man's a Triple Crown winner. You're not putting him on punt coverage. Come on now. Higgins isn't either. So that means this offense, this passing attack that leans on the pass more than almost any team in football, is fundamentally relying on unproven, unestablished names to be the difference between a good season and a great one whenever Chase or Higgins needs a breather, or worse, whenever one of them goes down with an injury. And Smith went name by name through this room, and I want to walk you through each one, because every single name here represents a different flavor of the same central question. Who is Joe Burrow's third option going to be in 2026? First up, a name that genuinely surprised a lot of people last season with how he emerged out of nowhere. His rise wasn't something anybody projected. Nobody saw that chemistry building with Burrow in advance, but he found a way to step into big moments precisely when the offense needed somebody to step up, and he delivered. That's the kind of story that gets Bengals fans excited, the undrafted or late-round guy who just shows up when his number's called. Then there's Charlie Jones out of Purdue, a name Smith specifically said he loved coming out of college. Good football player, natural slot presence, someone who can also contribute on special teams. But, and this is a real but, availability has been an issue. He's kind of faded from the conversation a bit, and in a room this competitive, fading from the conversation for even a season can be the difference between carving out a real role and getting passed by. And then we get to the name Smith, and his co-host spent the most time dissecting, Andre Iosivas. Now here's a guy who's actually gotten real opportunities, real live snaps, specifically because Higgins has dealt with stretches where he struggled to stay fully healthy and missed time. And look, the hope from the organization is clear. They want Iosivas to take that next step, to become a legitimate every-week option in this passing game. Maybe 2026 is finally the year that happens. But Smith didn't sugarcoat this part at all, and I respect that level of honesty in a breakdown like this. He pointed out that when you actually watch the tape, Iosivas has arguably regressed a little bit rather than progressed. And here's the theory behind why. The more responsibility that's gotten piled onto his plate, the more the pressure seems to have mounted on him, to the point where he started pressing instead of playing free and loose. Think about the environment he's operating in. He's lining up next to a literal Triple Crown winner. He's lining up next to an elite number 2 in Higgins. And then you've got Joe Burrow in that huddle, all business, all focus, alongside a guy like Joe Flacco, who has seen absolutely everything this league has to offer over the course of his career. That's an intimidating room to walk into every single day and try to prove you belong. And when a young player starts feeling that weight instead of playing with confidence, it shows up on tape in the form of drops, in the form of hesitation, in the form of routes that look tentative instead of decisive. And here's how Cincinnati responded to that uncertainty. According to Smith's breakdown, they went out and drafted competition. Enter the rookie out of Georgia, a legitimate speed demon, a 4th-round pick at 140th overall. And Smith framed this rookie's opportunity in a way that I think perfectly captures the stakes of this entire receiver room heading into camp. Is it this rookie's job to win, or is it his job to lose? Because if you're anyone else in that room right now, watching a fourth-round speedster get thrown straight into legitimate competition for real snaps, you should be feeling the heat. You should be a little panicked, a little worried, because the opportunities simply aren't unlimited in a room like this. Cincinnati has handed this kid a real chance, and part of the reason why, according to Smith, ties directly back to the pressure Zach Taylor and this entire coaching staff are under right now. When you're under that kind of pressure, you can't afford to sit on unproven assets and hope they figure it out on their own timeline. You have to go find competitors, throw them into the fire, and see who rises. And this is genuinely the biggest storyline of this entire receiver room heading into 2026. In my opinion, it's not whether Chase and Higgins are going to be dominant, because we already know they will be. It's who, outside of those two established stars, this coaching staff and this quarterback can actually count on when the lights are brightest and the stakes are highest. And speaking of the quarterback, Joe Burrow himself is clearly locked in on this exact question. Steve Smith's co-host made a great point here about how sharp Burrow is as a processor of the game, arguably one of the smartest players at the position in this entire league. He's not sitting back waiting to find out who his third and fourth options are during week 1 under the lights. He's figuring this out right now, in the spring, deep in the process of installing this offense, working through exactly who's going to be where when he needs them there, whenever Chase or Higgins can't be on the field. And from what's been described, Burrow has an incredibly open, ongoing dialogue with both offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher and head coach Zach Taylor about exactly what he's seeing from these young receivers on the practice field, who's making the necessary strides, who's stepping up when given the opportunity, and who might still need more seasoning before he can be fully trusted in a big moment. Now here's a question I want you to sit with, because it's the exact question Smith's co-host raised, and I think it's the single most important philosophical question hanging over this entire Bengals offense. Is it actually okay at the highest level of professional football to build your entire receiver room around just 2 elite guys with everybody else being a significant question mark? Is that a sustainable, championship caliber approach, or is that a house of cards waiting for one gust of wind to knock it over? And Smith's answer here was honestly one of the most thoughtful, nuanced points of the entire breakdown. He said it's fine. It's totally fine. Right up until the exact moment it isn't. Right up until you hit an instance, like Cincinnati experienced last season, where suddenly that dependency rears its head and the very thing that made you so dangerous becomes your Achilles heel instead. And that's such a sharp way to frame it, because it's true of every single season in this league. Every year presents new habits you have to break, new tendencies opposing coordinators pick up on. You develop these little comfortable patterns as an offense, certain signals, certain go-to concepts in certain situations, and those patterns work beautifully right up until an opposing defensive staff studies enough tape to crack the code. And once they crack it, you'd better have real answers, real alternatives, real depth to adjust with. Otherwise, you're stuck running the exact same predictable script into a defense that already knows what's coming. And that's precisely the adjustment Smith believes Cincinnati is now being forced to make in real time. They're recognizing that their lack of a proven, trusted third receiver, their lack of legitimate depth beyond the top 2, isn't just a minor roster hole anymore. It's becoming their single biggest vulnerability. And when I say depth, I don't just mean bodies on a roster. I mean productive players. Guys who don't drop the ball on critical third downs. Guys who show up in exactly the moments defenses try to take away Chase and Higgins through double coverage and physical, aggressive coverage at the line of scrimmage. Because here's the cold, hard truth about defending a receiver room like Cincinnati's. If you can make that third or fourth option genuinely fear the moment instead of embrace it, you've effectively neutralized this entire passing attack, no matter how good Chase and Higgins are individually. Now let's shift gears for a second, because there's another layer to this conversation that I think gets completely lost in the Chase and Higgins are unstoppable narrative, the explosive play problem. And this genuinely surprised me when Smith's co-host brought up the numbers, because when you watch Chase and Higgins play, your instinct says these guys are constantly ripping off chunk plays down the field. But the actual average depth on their receptions is way lower than you'd expect given how much individual talent is on the field. And here's why. According to this breakdown, Cincinnati has become, almost out of necessity, a precision passing offense built on layered, intermediate, and short area concepts rather than a vertical, take the top off the defense operation. Joe Burrow himself has apparently acknowledged this exact evolution publicly this spring. Defenses started playing Cincinnati differently once they saw how explosive this passing game could be a few years back, took away the big shots downfield, and Burrow essentially adapted by dinking and dunking his way down the field with Chase and Higgins instead, using that incredible chemistry and precision to manufacture success through volume and efficiency rather than home run splash plays. And listen, that approach absolutely works. It's produced one of the most efficient, prolific passing attacks in this entire league. But if you're Cincinnati, heading into this season, you know you need more juice down the field. You need explosive plays as a legitimate weapon, not just an occasional bonus. And Smith didn't dance around the root cause of this issue at all, he said it plainly. And I appreciated the bluntness. You have to get some offensive linemen who can actually block, give Joe Burrow real time in the pocket, and that alone unlocks so much more of what this passing game is fully capable of doing. Because right now, without consistent time, you simply can't dial up the deep developing shot plays as often as you'd like. Your quarterback has to get the ball out fast, which means shorter routes, which means a lower average depth of target, which means defenses can sit back, stay disciplined, and dare you to consistently execute a 15-play precision drive instead of fearing one explosive strike that changes the game in a single snap. And this ties directly back into the receiver room conversation. Because Smith made an incredible point about why this whole equation has still worked out reasonably well for Cincinnati despite these structural issues, the sheer talent level of Chase and Higgins is so elite that it masks the problem, right up until it doesn't. It doesn't really hamper this offense in a lot of games. But then there are the specific high-leverage moments. The games Cincinnati really should have walked away with easily but somehow found a way to make close, or even lost, where the lack of versatility, the predictability of the approach, finally caught up to them. Defenses figured out the blueprint. Apply pressure. Get after Burrow before those deep developing plays can come together. Jam and agitate the receivers hard at the line of scrimmage to disrupt that precise timing this whole system depends on. And at just enough critical moments last season, that blueprint worked against Cincinnati. Smith summed up this entire structural issue with one of my favorite lines from the whole breakdown. Cincinnati's offensive menu has been way too fast foodish. You've got to sit and dine as a complete football team. Fast casual doesn't get you deep into January and February. You need the full multi-course meal, the passing attack obviously, but also a run game that can control tempo and keep defenses honest, and a defense that can hold up when the offense inevitably has an off night. And we've watched this exact story play out for Cincinnati multiple times now. An incredible, high-powered passing attack that simply doesn't have enough complementary football around it to close out the moments that matter most. And there's one more layer to all of this that I think deserves way more attention than it gets. Imagine being a receiver drafted onto this roster in the late rounds, or signed as an undrafted free agent. You already know you're not walking into a situation where you're going to see major targets no matter how good you genuinely believe you are. Because you're not as good as Chase, and even if somehow you were, in a vacuum, on pure talent, you're never going to get the opportunity to actually prove it on a Sunday, because the target share simply doesn't exist behind those top two options. Smith described being drafted as a receiver by Cincinnati as basically the best gift and the biggest curse you can receive simultaneously at this position. Best gift, because you're in one of the most talented quarterback and receiver rooms in this entire league, learning from some of the best to ever do it. Absorbing knowledge every single day in those meeting rooms. Biggest curse, because you will hardly ever get to actually apply any of it on the field in a meaningful way. That's the reality of trying to climb the depth chart in Cincinnati right now. So how does this offense actually evolve to fix these issues heading into 2026? Smith's co-host offered a genuinely compelling theory here, and it's one I think Bengals fans should be excited about. Cincinnati isn't going to abandon what makes them special. Joe Burrow operating primarily out of the shotgun, dissecting and processing defenses about as well as anybody in the entire league. That's not going anywhere, and it shouldn't. But there's a real belief that this coaching staff is going to start incorporating more snaps under center this season, leaning more into a genuine play-action passing game to help manufacture some of those missing explosive shots down the field. And here's an interesting wrinkle. Backup quarterback Joe Flacco reportedly has real experience and real comfort operating that exact style of offense, showing legitimate aptitude for that under-center, play-action, shot-play approach. That could become a real complementary wrinkle Cincinnati leans on this season to diversify what's become an increasingly predictable attack. And finally, let's circle back to the concept that ties this entire breakdown together, continuity. Because when Smith was asked directly how valuable it is that this specific group, the coaching staff, the offensive philosophy, the quarterback, and the top two receivers, is all coming back together for another season, his answer was immediate and emphatic. It matters enormously. When you don't have to spend training camp figuring out what a brand new teammate likes or dislikes, when you already know each other inside and out, your conversations as a room operate on a completely different, more advanced level. Instead of covering the basics, you're deep into the nuance, breaking down a specific back shoulder throw from the previous week's practice and dissecting exactly why it worked or didn't. That's the kind of granular, elevated communication that only comes from real shared experience over real time. And Smith took this even further with a detail that genuinely blew my mind a little bit. When you've built up that level of continuity with a quarterback, something as simple as a hand signal can carry 3 completely different meanings depending on the situation. It might mean exactly what it's designed to mean for that specific route. It might be a deliberate decoy, thrown out specifically to mislead a defense that started picking up on your signals. Or it might be part of an elaborate sequence, a decoy signal, an audible, a glance and a subtle nonverbal cue between Chase and Burrow that completely changes the play without a single word being spoken out loud. That is next-level chemistry. That is the kind of unspoken communication that separates good quarterback-receiver duos from truly special ones. And that brought the conversation to arguably its most fascinating comparison of the entire breakdown, is what Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase have building towards something on the level of the legendary chemistry between Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Smith didn't shy away from that comparison at all, and honestly, given everything laid out in this breakdown, the shared history, the unspoken communication, the sheer command these two have over each other's tendencies, it's not a crazy comparison to make. It's the kind of quarterback-receiver bond that takes years to build and can completely transform an offense's ceiling when it's fully unlocked. Let's talk about the historical context here for a second, because I think it matters for understanding just how unusual this specific situation actually is. Think about the receiver rooms that have won championships in this league recently. Think about the ones that have fallen short. Almost every single time, the difference isn't the top of the roster, it's the margin. It's the 3rd, 4th, and 5th options who show up in January and February when the top 2 guys are drawing double coverage and the whole defensive game plan is built specifically to take them away. You can go back through Super Bowl rosters over the last decade and find this pattern over and over again. A team with 2 elite stars gets bounced early because nobody else could get open, and a team with a slightly less flashy top 2 goes on a run because 6, 7, 8 guys can all win one-on-one when it matters. That's the blueprint Cincinnati is chasing right now, and it's exactly why this depth conversation isn't some nitpicky offseason storyline. It's the single biggest swing factor for how far this specific roster can actually go. And I want to bring the quarterback piece back into this, because I don't think we talk enough about how much extra weight gets loaded onto Joe Burrow specifically because of this depth situation. When your 3rd option isn't fully trusted yet, your quarterback doesn't get to play free and easy. He has to be more precise with his reads, more careful with his eyes, because he genuinely cannot afford to lock onto a receiver who isn't going to consistently win his matchup. That adds a mental tax to every single dropback. Compare that to a team where every single receiver on the field is a legitimate threat. The quarterback gets to play faster, looser, more instinctively, because literally any read is a good read. Burrow is talented enough to operate at an elite level even with that extra mental tax, and that's part of what makes him special. But imagine what this offense looks like if that tax gets removed entirely. Imagine Burrow operating with full conviction on every single read instead of some. That's the ceiling that's sitting right there, completely untapped. If this receiver room can develop the way the organization is hoping it does. There's also a scheme wrinkle worth digging into here, because I think it explains a lot about why certain young receivers have struggled to find consistent footing in this offense. Cincinnati's passing concepts are genuinely complex. They're built on timing, on leverage, on receivers understanding exactly how a coverage shell is going to react based on subtle pre-snap indicators. That's an incredibly difficult system for a young player to fully absorb, especially one who's splitting practice reps with established veterans and not getting the live game snaps necessary to build real confidence. It's part of why guys like Iosivas can look tentative on tape even when the physical talent is clearly there. It's not always about ability. Sometimes it's about reps, about trust, about a young player finally getting comfortable enough with the system that his eyes stop drifting to where he's supposed to be and start trusting what he's actually seeing from the defense in real time. That transition from thinking to reacting is where receivers in this league either take off or stall out completely. And for a handful of these young Bengals receivers, 2026 is shaping up to be exactly that make-or-break transition year. Now let's zoom out for a second and talk about what this all means from a roster-building perspective, because I think this connects directly back to that hot seat conversation Smith brought up earlier. If Cincinnati's front office truly believes in this top-heavy approach, if they genuinely believe 2 elite stars plus a rotating cast of developing pieces is the winning formula in today's NFL, then this coaching staff has to be the group that actually develops those pieces. There's no hiding behind roster limitations if the front office has clearly prioritized star power at the top of this depth chart over swinging bigger on proven depth. That puts enormous pressure on the coaching staff, on the position coaches specifically working with these younger receivers every single day in practice, to accelerate development in a way that takes the pressure off relying purely on the draft or free agency to solve this. And that's a fair thing to hold Zach Taylor and his offensive staff accountable for this season, separate from just wins and losses on Sunday. So here's where all of this leaves us heading into training camp, Bengals Nation. You've got a receiver room with arguably the best top 2 tandem in all of football, chemistry with the quarterback that's approaching legendary territory, and continuity across the entire coaching staff, quarterback, and top 2 receivers that very few teams in this league can match. That's the incredible upside sitting right in front of this offense. But you've also got a real, legitimate depth problem behind those 2 stars, an offensive line that needs to hold up to unlock more explosive plays down the field, and a head coach who, according to at least one respected former player's breakdown, is genuinely feeling the heat to prove all of these pieces can come together into something more complete than just a fireworks show that fizzles out in January. That's the tightrope Cincinnati is walking in 2026. Electric at the top, uncertain underneath, and the answer to which version of this team shows up is going to depend entirely on names we're not even talking about enough right now. The guy who emerged out of nowhere last season, Charlie Jones finally staying available, Andre Iosivas silencing the regression talk, or a 4th-round speedster out of Georgia forcing his way into the conversation before anybody expected him to. All right, that's the full breakdown for today, but I need you to weigh in. Smash that like button if you believe this Bengals receiver room finds its 3rd option in 2026, and get down in those comments and tell me who you think it's going to be. And if you're not already subscribed to Dre Talk Sports, get on it right now, because this is where you get the no-filter football breakdowns, the deep dives nobody else is doing, the analysis that actually goes beneath the surface. Hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, because training camp is almost here, and I promise you, you do not want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Dre. Out.